Check, check, 1, 2. Look like a little country, some rock and roll and blues. 'Cause we sure love playing for good people like you. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.
Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, the radio show that features discussions with and the music of local musicians. I am your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we are at a rehearsal in the sanctuary of St. Francis of the Islands Episcopal Church with members of Savannah Baroque. You'll hear Savannah Baroque around town periodically. Welcome to Music Local and Sustainable, members of the Savannah Baroque.
Thank you, Dave.
Thank you, Dave.
I'm going to let you introduce yourselves and also indicate what instrument you play.
I'm Ann Cafferty, and I play Baroque violin.
And I'm Gina Malilly, and I play the Baroque flute.
I'm Ann Acker. I started all this trouble. I play keyboards of any type, so harpsichord, early pianos, organ, various things like that. And I also wanted to mention on my other members here that they both play with the Philharmonic as well on modern instruments and are amazing. And then, of course, we have other members who couldn't be here today. We have Marcy Brenner, who is our amazing viola da gamba player. And then we have sopranos Ashley Roper and Tina Zenker-Williams as well. We're very blessed to have all these people.
Why Baroque music?
Baroque music is awesome. It rocks. I mean, there's a lot of improvisatory element. It was originally very much something about conveying feelings and passions and stirring your audience to have certain feelings. Great. It's very exciting to play. I love playing Baroque music.
I just find it a lot more demanding on me as a musician. It pulls from my desire to be intellectual but improvisatory about things. So I find it a great challenge, and it really enthuses me to keep practicing and keep working and keep learning new things. It expands whole new worlds, and it really helps with playing modern music as well. You start to become less attached to the page, and it can inform centuries later music that you're playing. Just being put on the spot in a Baroque piece where you're having to improvise an ornament, it calms you down to do a Brahms symphony for the bazillionth time, and you try something a little different, and it's fun.
I just think Baroque music is incredibly fun. I just bought this Baroque violin, and since it's so new, and you do play very differently on the Baroque violin and in Baroque music differently than you would in classical music. It's phrased completely differently. The violin is set up completely differently. It's just so much fun, and as Gina said, we love playing classical music, but it's true, when you're playing Beethoven's Fifth for the 5,000th time, it's just maybe even a little bit more fun to be playing something that in a style that's different.
Well, as a listener, when you're listening to Beethoven's Fifth for the 5,000th time, you want to hear something different.
That's true.
But classical musicians are often criticized when they take very unique approaches to standard repertoire. So how in something like a Beethoven piece where everybody knows almost every note, can you be creative in something like that without upsetting?
Well, that's a good question, because I know, like in the Beethoven sonatas, being a keyboard player, the style of changing it has actually changed over the centuries, over the decades, so modern audiences have gotten used to the way they're played now by the mainstream, which really isn't what was done, because musical interpretation, performance styles is a continuum that evolves, and Beethoven is really much closer to a Baroque heritage than he is to a modern heritage, which is quite interesting. I mean, Beethoven played on very, very early pianos, nothing like modern Steinways. He didn't have these great big orchestras like we have now. The style of performance should be much closer to rhetoric, and then you start heading back closer into where Baroque music is coming from, where it's a type of communication. I loved what Gina said about the intellectual component of it, because yes, it really does engage the brain, particularly if I'm playing Bach fugues. It really gets the mind going, and I love that as a listener too, to hear that.
I think the renewal of interest in historically informed performance,
Yes.
or HIP, started with the Baroque, going back to those old instruments, and it blew the door wide open. So now we can have this new approach to Beethoven, because we're taking the same sort of research route back in time, because we did get tired of the 5,000th recording of Beethoven 5. That's perfect now because of CDs or MP3s. So there's great work done with Roger Norrington and John Elliott Gardner and Nicholas Harnoncourt. And then they have given birth to younger groups that are going to do something slightly differently. So it does finally give us a different way of playing. There's even some performances of Mahler symphonies. And we think of Mahler as more modern, and we've kind of caught up with the technology that Mahler had, and we're doing it the way he would have wanted because he was very specific, but there's even research into that now. So I think we've tapped into something as musicians that is really going to make this world a lot more interesting, with all kinds of different approaches, so that it becomes more acceptable and almost expected for you to do something different instead of the same thing.
Now, my understanding is that the markings are less precise in Baroque music than they are in, say, Romantic music, in terms of meter, in terms of what ornamentation that the composer wanted.
You have to have done your homework, and you have to have done it for the particular composer, the decade, the country, to know how to interpret that music. You have to have gone to a workshop on Baroque dance to know how to play some of these things. It's absolutely true. The page is, the notes are sketched on there, and particularly my part. Often I just am given a bass line with a little number, and I get to do something with that chord and that bass line in a lot of the pieces. So again, the improvisatory element, but within a structure and an understanding of the style. And we do our best for that, the historically informed performance. We do our best. We're modern people. We didn't live in those times, but it definitely makes the music much more exciting. This is not the Baroque music of the 1950s and 60s. Typewriter Bach, I used to call it. That wasn't what it was supposed to be. That was really a phenomenon, I think, of the world wars and the mechanization of society, going with this sort of playing. That's not what we do. That's not what that music was supposed to do. Handel was a rock star. Handel shouldn't be boring. It's got to dance. It's got to move. It has to make the audience feel pain or love or want to dance a jig.
Now, I listened to something like Stokowski's versions of Bach with a full orchestra and get upper gastrointestinal distress. And the romanticized and lush versions of something that's really very simple. And I don't mean simple in the reductionist sense, but the elements should all be clear and there, and not mushed together in this huge romantic sweep that you hear in these recordings. How do you get listeners away from that?
I haven't had a problem. I think the audiences are ready. They really are responding to the way that Baroque music is being performed by the newer groups, especially today, where it's more exciting. They're like, whoa, this is Baroque music? I thought this was supposed to be boring. This is fabulous. I'm going to bring so-and-so with me next time. I don't think it's been a problem. And in all fairness to Stokowski, he was a creature of his time and place. And he at least brought Bach forward. I mean, a lot of this music could have been lost. We may not approve of what he did, but at least he did something different. So that's good too. I have a digital harpsichord as well.
And I think also people are interested in different sounds. I think a lot about the iPod or iTunes and how that's changed everything.
Yeah.
That people aren't buying albums really anymore. They want this eclectic mix of things. So we play into that very well because we have a different sound and a different approach to what people are used to hearing. And so that uniqueness is a good marketing tool.
As a young cellist, I really probably would have appreciated a group like this to hear, primarily because when I looked at Baroque music as a cellist, because we just did the continuo portion, talk about boring, and then at Spoleto, they have a chamber music series at Spoleto. They bring various performers in who are soloists on their own, just in to play in small ensembles. And they did a Brandenburg concerto. Alicia Weilerstein was the cellist in that small ensemble. I mean, the way she played that continuo section was like it was Dvorak's cello concerto. Really getting the attacks and getting the intensity. And I remember myself back going, nah. Get me out of here as fast as you can. But that excitement, I wish I'd had the sense of that excitement back then.
That plays into what we were talking about earlier about the page. We can, with the additions that we've had as student musicians growing up, you can check out. Because the page has told you how to do everything.
And it wasn't necessarily correct.
Right, it was edited by somebody. And so the expectation of the Baroque musician was that they were not only performers, they performed on all of the instruments. They're kind of like your rock bands of today where they could play many of the parts. And they were composers in their own right. So all of that combines in one person to create this very aural tradition of playing. And we got a little too married to the page, and that can be boring for the musician, no matter what part you have, even if it's the melody. It still can be very boring, or boring to the audience too. If you're not doing what that cellist was doing, the audience is going to respond in kind.
You're painting by numbers. The picture's just not going to be as good if you're painting by numbers. Getting back to your continuo, a good Baroque ensemble really is a jazz group. You have the bass. The bass is incredibly important. The continuo is a sustained bass instrument like the cello, in our case, viola da gamba, occasionally organ, and then you have something like a lute or a harpsichord typically. Sometimes you can use a big bassoon for the bass line as well, because that bass has got to be important. Everything is built off of the bass, particularly for Handel and Bach and a lot of the others. Some of the earlier composers, it's a little bit different, but that bass is so important. And then you have your treble instruments dancing around on top of that and dancing together, and sometimes we have our singers. It's an ensemble that we're not just playing off of some recipe off a written page. We're creating music which is based on what is in front of us. And it's different every time that we play, I would say. Definitely a little bit different. Much more like a jazz group. It's a lot more fun than playing exactly what you're supposed to play, or your teacher will whop your knuckles with a ruler like the old days.
Well, and I noticed that everybody has a pencil on their stands.
Yeah, because, for example, this piece of music that's up is something that I played on the standard violin, the regular violin, for years. And to interpret it in a Baroque manner is you just have to completely change everything. And it takes time, and I really feel that it's good for my brain, that it's really fun to see the differences and try them out. Even with a Mozart symphony. To me, in a Mozart symphony, there's just a certain style that you use. And there's a good way to play it, and then there's a kind of a sloppy way to play it, which some people do. But at its best, the style between even one orchestra and the next is pretty much going to be the same. The phrasing, it's just a smart way to do it. But it's different with Baroque music because it's much more creative, and I find it right at the moment more fun.
We're having a lot of fun, but we also get along really super. It was so exciting when just the constellation of people came together, because I had had this in the back of my mind for a while. And then Gina and I got to play together a couple of times, and then one blessed day she said, "If you ever want to work together." And I'm like, yes, I have a flute player. Ann Cafferty then wanted to play, and I had already been working with Ashley Roper with the Galliards in early music, and she was all excited about doing Baroque music, and she's a very talented young singer. And I had run into Tina, and Tina goes, "Yeah, if you ever want to do some harpsichord music." And Tina sang with one of the Philharmonic Chamber, so we worked together then. And then my friend Marcy Brenner, who was a professional viola da gamba player in Europe, where the early music scene is much, much more active than here, and has been for a long time. And she retired back to the United States and moved to Jacksonville, to our wonderful delight, and she loves coming up to play with us. So we have just a great group of people. We have a rule: you check your ego at the door and come on in and have a good time. And then we collaborate together. It's not me ordering people what to do. It's not Gina ordering everyone what to do, or Anne. It's just like, "Oh, what do you think about this? Let's try this. Let's work together." And it's really, really marvelous, marvelous group.
Tonight, we are at a rehearsal in the sanctuary of St. Francis of the Islands Episcopal Church with members of Savannah Baroque. So when you make changes in interpretation, those suggestions come from anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and then we either say, "I don't think that's a good idea," or we get on board with it, and then we all try to phrase in the same way as much as our instruments will allow.
You say, "What do you think of that? Okay, let's try this. Now that won't work. What about this?" Or just before you came in, we're like, "Well, what if you both played that line together in this piece we're doing in our January concert?" And they go, "No, that's not going to work." We all work together. It's really, really fabulous.
It's really great moments too in rehearsal when we try things and they fail miserably, and it's wonderful that everybody's willing to take those risks. And risk taking is a big part of Baroque historical performance. It's wonderful to watch everyone studying and learning and then trying to see what works and what doesn't work, and that we're all doing that together is an incredible thing.
Now, the studying and learning part, what are the sources that you can draw from to bring to the group the various interpretations, the various ways that you want to do something? What are those sources that you can draw from?
Recordings. We have great access to fabulous players that we can learn from, and it's so easily accessible. So you can get a whole bunch of different ideas, decide whether you like them, and then if you do like some of them, you can incorporate them. It's just totally different than when we were kids, where there were no recordings, and you had to rely entirely on your teachers because there was no access.
And the other big thing are the treatises. Yeah. For the flute, in fact, our treatise on playing the flute by Quantz is one of the big treatises that everybody uses.
Yes.
The fun thing about the treatises is all of them disagree with each other. So for flute, we have Haute Terre, which is a slim volume. That's lots of fun. He was at the French court during the Baroque years, and he even had a painting or drawing made of himself playing the flute. And it says, "You hold the flute like this, look at the picture." And it's very friendly, and try these things, and if you're having this trouble, maybe try this other thing. And then Quantz is this
big,
tome.
Fat book, yeah.
And he's so mean through the whole thing. He talks about ability is no substitute for talent, and then he gives these really detailed lists of, if you have this phrase, then you do this ornament, or you do this kind of articulation, and then he's got chapters of this, and then at the end of it, he's like, of course, good taste can overrule all of these things. So you're like, well, what did I just read? And then when you didn't think it could get any meaner, we have the Tromlitz book. He was a student of Quantz, and Tromlitz even calls out a student of his. The student would have sued him for libel in these days. He'd been saying false things about Tromlitz, and he was a terrible flutist, and blah, blah. And it takes up an entire chapter. But It builds off of the quants, but it's just, they're funny to read and they have great information. And it tells you that you're on the right track by making decisions based on this information, but there's not a right answer. And when we've been trained really for a long time on our modern instruments, there's always a right answer. And so it's very freeing and it's fun to explore all of these different ways of thinking.
Now, was Quantz a contemporary of the Baroque period?
Yes, he was the teacher of the most famous flute player of all time, which was Frederick the Great of Prussia. He was second, I think, on the pay scale to the head of the army. He was up there. His arch rival, of course, was C.P.E. Bach. Mm-hmm. So Bach's son was there, employed at the court.
And wrote a great big tome on playing keyboard instruments.
Which totally disagrees with Quantz's on playing the flute. So I really would have loved to have seen discussions between the two of them.
Oh, it must have been brutal. Yeah. And of course, Quantz probably would have been insulting CPE's dad.
All the time.
CPE being one of the sons of Bach. And Johann Sebastian Bach was being considered old-fashioned by that time as well. So the other thing that I know I study, I read a lot about the history of the times, the culture of the times, oratory of the times, theater of the times, because it all comes together, and you have to know about the court life, and you need to know a bit about the peasant life, because some of that music comes into the court life. The French courts really got into dressing up or pretending they were shepherds and shepherdesses out on the hillsides. We're going to be doing one of those numbers in January. It's going to be great. We're not dressing up as shepherds and shepherdesses particularly.
I thought we were.
Well, Ashley might. Ashley sent me a link to this incredible dress that she wants to wear for it, which would be very much in the style of, but I don't think she will, but it's... You know about the milieu, you know about the times, and then you do what you can with it. And as we said before, you need to learn about dance, because a lot of Baroque instrumental numbers are suites of pieces based on dances. They're not exactly dance two anymore, but they're based on dances, so you need to know how they were played. If it's a gigue, you need to know that they were jumping and doing things like this, so you can do it at a tempo and with a character that you can envision someone dancing to.
A minuet with the lift on 3 going into 1.
Right, and the 2 measures for the steps and a minuet too, right? You need to know all this stuff, and then you put it together and let it dance.
Now, you mentioned the improvisational aspects of playing. Is there a tradition of improvisation in Baroque playing?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's what the treatises cover and tell us. So we know where things are appropriate and where things wouldn't be, and then what kind of rules to follow. So you can't just suddenly start playing blues scales in the middle of a C.P. Bach sonata, although we'll probably get there on a recording one day. But it plays into the composer-performer situation. So once you get to Mozart, he's a performer and a composer, and then we start to get into composers alone. By the 20th century, they play their instruments, but that's less important. They are controlling all of the people that they're writing for.
Except in the cadenzas, those were improvised typically until we were kids and we had to memorize the one stuck in front of us.
Right. Right. So it's sort of an evolution of job as well as something that informs us of what we can do as players.
So the Baroque composers were players.
Yes.
And in the Baroque period, players pretty much played anything and everything.
They had to
they would switch off instruments, so they would be knowledgeable about the characteristics of that instrument.
Exactly. So especially the wind players played all of the wind instruments. Quantz talks about the oboe at the end of his treatise, and that I don't play the oboe. I've played an A on an oboe before, in tune.
Yeah, good.
And even though the key system is similar, it was basically the same then. So we don't have that as much now. You are expected to specialize on your instrument, and that's it. Or you're expected to specialize as a composer or to specialize as a singer. But you get a basic education that kind of covers everything like you would have as a Baroque musician, but then that's not cultivated. It stops, unless you actively pursue all of the other elements.
One of the other reasons I love this music is because of these instruments, the sound of these instruments. The first time I heard a Baroque flute, it was like, whoa, that's gorgeous. It's this beautiful, beautiful tone. The first time I heard a harpsichord was on a recording, because I was studying some pieces I was working on, and I went and got a recording, and it was on harpsichord, and I played it and went, whoa, this is cool. It answered a lot of my questions about the music, which I was struggling with playing on modern piano in my case. Composers like Scarlatti, I think, do not transpose well to the modern piano, but they are incredible on the harpsichord because that's Spanish-Italian type music. A harpsichord is a big guitar with a keyboard, really, and it just took off. The first time I heard an early piano, I don't play Mozart on modern piano at all anymore unless I have to. It's just incredible on early pianos. The music is a creature of its time, its place, the composer, the instruments that were there when the composer was writing. Some music written today sounds best on a digital piano better than a real piano because that's what was in the composer's ear. So, in the Baroque violin, it's a much more, again, rhetorical sort of instrument than a modern violin. One of the things that happened as you moved into through the 19th century, into the later part of the 19th century, is an emphasis on smooth, continuous playing, legato playing, continuous sound. And that's not what we're doing here. That's not Baroque music. The default touch on a modern piano is legato. That's what we teach children. Default touch on a harpsichord is détaché, slightly detached. And you play with those spaces between the notes all the time. It lets you play with these little figures within the music in a way you can't if you're constantly playing legato.
Basically, in composers like Beethoven and Brahms, you kind of crescendo, you kind of get louder through the longer notes so that the whole thing sounds like it's all on one bow, and your bow's like 30 feet long. So you have to do the exact opposite thing in Baroque music. Like as Anne said, it's definitely into smaller fragments on the Baroque violin, and you don't play through the longer notes, taper on the longer notes. On the modern violin, most of the time, you play into the next note with no separation at all.
So you're following the harpsichord that you want to detach the notes from one another to a certain degree.
Right,
compared to legato, compared to sort of a sweeping, constant sound.
Right.
And it's a big sound. That's what's expected all the time, especially if the whole evolution of the flute, we became a metal instrument just so that we could compete with this big sound that's happening in the orchestra. And so a lot of little musical nuances that you would like to do are lost just because you're trying to have this huge sound all the time, and it doesn't lend itself to musicality after a while.
And you look at a modern flute and you say, woodwind?
Exactly.
Really?
Well, there's a wonderful maker in Asheville. Chris Abel in Asheville makes these wonderful modern wooden flutes with a silver key mechanism. And some of the major makers, Powell and a few others, also make these instruments. And they're amazing. The silver flutes of the 19th century, some of them were wood with silver mechanism, and they just didn't have the power that the silver flutes had. But these new ones, they sound great. So one day, it's nice to go back to wood.
You're listening to WRUU-LP, Savannah, Georgia, 107.5 FM, WRUU.org. We are Savannah Soundings, community radio with global soul. If your business enjoys the programming on WRUU-LP, please support the station with a donation. Let your customers, neighbors, and friends know that you share our vision of building a thriving economy based on a diverse and vibrant community. Our listeners will know you support Savannah's only broad-based community radio station. Become a tower sponsor or underwriter. To check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Again, to check out the levels of corporate sponsorship and to donate, go to www.wruu.org/corporate. Thank you for listening to and supporting WRUU LP. You're listening to Music Local and Sustainable, and I'm your host, Dave Lake. Tonight, we are at a rehearsal in the sanctuary of St. Francis of the Islands Episcopal Church with members of Savannah Baroque. You mentioned ornamentation. Each of you, I think, mentioned ornamentation. What is ornamentation, and what are the ornamentations that are classically thought of as being Baroque?
Depends on if you're in France or Germany. They all had their own national approach to ornaments.
Well, let's start with France.
France has the reputation of ornamenting everything all the time, as much as possible.
Hence the word Baroque. I think it comes from the architecture.
Architecture,
It's actually complex. When you think of Baroque, you think of very complex and intricate.
Right. And then the Italians sort of left it up to the musicians. So Quantz talks about that. The second movements of Italian pieces are basic melodies, and they didn't write in their ornamentation. The French did. They put in all kinds of slashes and things that we're not used to seeing as modern players. And the Germans also write in a lot of ornamentation. So
Bach wrote them out. What will look like, melody thing is actually a written out, very specific ornament in the score. Exactly.
Right. So, and then there are giant modern treatises on ornamentation, and then there will be another giant treatise on ornamentation that disagrees with that one. So the first thing you need is a little sheet that explains, especially the French symbols, so that the slash one way will mean come from the note below and go to the note that's there, and then a slash going the other way would be over the note and coming down to the note that's there. So things like that have to get used to seeing, and then reacting to that as you're reading it can be a little slow. It's like, come on, catch up with what I'm doing.
It seems like a foreign language.
It is.
It is, absolutely.
And that's what the Quantz is so great, and C.P. Ebach has this too, written out ornaments that you can put into a piece that doesn't have that ornamentation. So Quantz has an entire chapter on second movements of Italian pieces, so that if it's doing this melodic thing, you could use the following very complicated ornament. So you can go over the top. There's another great resource, which is the Telemann Methodical Sonatas, and he was the only Baroque composer that we found that took especially the slow movements, and he wrote out an ornamentation. So that tells us everything. It tells us how much to ornament, because sometimes we're afraid to ornament too much. Like, let's add a cadential trill and that's enough. This is very complicated. Sometimes completely changes the rhythm, sometimes completely changes the shape of the melody. And there are 12 of those. So those are great resources for us to feel better about ourselves when we sit down to ornament, especially slow movements, which are what generally needs the ornamentation.
Now, can you do that? Could you take this written out pattern that Telemann gave you and then transpose that into another piece?
Oh, sure. The composers steal from each other all the time from that period, so
absolutely.
You absolutely should steal Telemann's things and ideas and put it, as long as it's nationally appropriate. So if it's a French piece, you wouldn't want to necessarily use Telemann's ornamentation for it.
But of course, the goal is to hopefully absorb enough of it that then you can just not think so hard about it. Because if you're thinking too hard about it, it doesn't sound natural anymore. So that's the hard part. It's the learning stages. They're hard. And then there's also the stage of live performance,
right,
where we can get frightened and come back. It's like doing the Olympic floor routine, and are you going to do the triple Salchow or whatever? That's probably skating. Are you gonna? No, they're going to do it. No, they're not doing that one this time. They're only doing the double. That's how we feel with ornaments.
Yeah.
It's very similar, isn't it?
It is.
It's like doing a figure skating routine. Oh, that's what we do. And sometimes we fall on our faces on the ice.
It's okay to fall on your face if you're not being recorded. It just is. And that's why a lot of times when you listen to recordings of, for example, this Isabella Leonarda, Italian woman composer, she was born in 1620 and she spent her life in a convent and wrote a lot of stuff. It's very rhapsodic, and I mean, anybody that was listening to music at that time, they probably didn't sweat a little mistake or two, but there is a difference between what you're going to do with the Leonarda when you've got a microphone in your face, and if you didn't. Then you just feel free to experiment with things, and especially if it was a situation where people were, as Anne said, having a drink or playing cards, then you just really feel like you could just about do anything and then see what works.
Well, let me make a quick note here, because I want to remember to bring a deck of cards next time I come to a Savannah Baroque concert.
Yes, and a drink. This is by Isabella Leonarda. And it is from her Sonata Duodecimo. We won't play the whole thing. We're just going to play a couple sections from it.
You know, I think that going into a convent in 1636 was a pretty viable option. This was an Italian noblewoman. Her parents were very well respected, and she had a great life in there. She was a very strong political figure, and she ran a lot of aspects of the church. And
that's where the really bright women went.
Yeah, right, because then they didn't have to be barefoot and pregnant all the time.
Exactly. We're just starting to work on these pieces.
Yeah, we're just, you're right.
That was like the third read through on it.
Right.
Now, how much time do you have for rehearsal?
Almost none.
The concert in January
We'll be getting together a fair number of times.
I made a spreadsheet.
Yes.
Yes.
Because we all have different lives and different places. And
Yeah, it's hard to get everyone together.
It's hard to do.
I mean, in our dreams, we would get together like every Monday for 4 hours, but we all have lives.
We all live in different parts of
That too. We live spread around.
And honestly, from Anne's point of view, I'm not sure I'd want to do that for 4 hours.
Yeah,
because
take
of the
breaks.
mechanics.
We take
The
breaks.
mechanics are so different.
Yeah,
It's wonderful to see that.
Yeah, it's true, and going back and forth between the two is really interesting. I like to practice this a lot if I'm going to play on it. Right now, this isn't the case, but for the one on January 13th, I'll be able to spend.
Could you go through some of these ornaments and talk about them? What are they, and what do they sound like?
The biggest one would be the cadential trill. So you come to a cadence, you come to the end of something. And so you have... That's telling people it's the end. It's not always written in, but it's just basically expected by the end you get to something. So that's a nice one. The other thing about trills in the Baroque period is generally it starts on the upper note. So if I'm playing a melody and I want to I need to start on the upper note. The note, so I have an A and it says trill. I know that A is going to trill to B, but I need to start the trill on the B. And that's a big, on the beat. And that's a big difference from what we would see in modern instruments. And you have more.
Yeah, there's just lots of little tricks. I mean, we could go on for hours with the fancy ones.
Right,
but, there's lots of little ones that will add. I mean, I hardly play these things the same way twice. The left hand, the bass line, you have to leave that. But within the harmony, just like a jazz ensemble, you have certain things that you can do. You know, I'm looking at this simple little thing right here, and I could go. I could fill things in, you know, that might be written there. I could do that instead. If there's an ascending line. There's lots of different ways you can change it up. Once you understand the piece well enough, then you could start, they just start happening after a while. That's the goal, they just start happening. And then we can be our checks on each other, and you could say, that's not the correct style for that particular composer.
We haven't gotten there yet. I don't think we've gotten that nerdy yet.
I don't want to be too nerdy. I mean, we're nerdy, but we also live in the modern age, and we want to make it exciting. And as you were talking about with recording, I have a friend who passed away a few years ago who is this fabulous harpsichordist, and he sent me a recording he made, and it didn't sound like him, because he was being too careful. And I think that happens a lot with recordings. Not so much anymore. We're in this wonderful time right now, really just the last couple years, with the YouTube recordings, which of live performances. And they're so much freer. Mm-hmm. It's starting to go into more formal recording too, but boy, YouTube recordings are great.
That's where I listen to everything. And then I decide what I like. I mean, some YouTube recordings are just dreadful.
Yes.
But they also have recordings of people that really know what they're doing. And so you have to separate the wheat from the chaff.
The Baroque period didn't always specify instruments. For instance, this Marais piece, you can say it better than I do.
Marais.
It just says 2 treble instruments and continuo?
Yeah.
So that could be anything and anything.
Okay, well, we're going to do a piece with 3 of us right now. This piece can also be done with our gamba player as well on the bottom line, which adds a nice depth, but she's not here today. So this is a piece by Marais. It's from his pièce en trio. This is from the second suite, and we're going to play the fantasy. So Gina will be playing the top part. And then Anne will be playing the second part. And then I'm given a bass line, and I get to figure out what chords I play. So we'll see how that goes today. Marais.
M-A-R-I-N. M-A-R-A-I-S.
1656 to 1728.
And is this one of the pieces that you're going to be performing at the Love and Passion
It is.
performance on January 13th at St. John's Episcopal Church?
fantastic, because they didn't always have certain things. They're like, okay, who's in town, who's free, who's not sick tonight, come on over, let's play, here's what we've got, and you work from there. You never knew how many people you had in the orchestra. I mean, one fun thing that we're doing is when we have our singers and they're doing some piece which is out of an opera, Baroque opera or a Baroque oratorio, and we have the instrumentalists, we have 4 instrumentalists. We don't have a big orchestra. They didn't have big orchestras then, maybe a little bigger than ours, but they didn't have big orchestras. So we take that and we say, let's make this work with 4 people, and it's I like it. It's a much lighter underpinning to the singer, and I think it makes the singer feel a bit freer too, as we will show in January. So our next concert in January. We are doing something new. We're going to have it twice in one day at the same place, because some people can't get out at night or don't want to go out at night because maybe they can't drive in the dark anymore. And some people work downtown. So we're going to be doing a 12 noon performance and a 7 p.m. with a nap in between. Baroque music is about the passions. It's about making your audience members feel love or hate or joy, and I can even get into the language of the figures, which we won't get into today. So we've got pieces about love and passion and loss, and we have one mad song, and and we're doing some Marais, because Marais is just plain sexy. And the Marais music is all that wonderful movie some years ago, Tous les matins du monde, All the Mornings of the World, which was done with the gamba, and it's just so sad and beautiful and romantic. That's all Marais. His music is just French. And it's going to be neat. It's going to be a neat concert.
Now, what sort of ornaments are there on the violin?
Interesting thing that Gina was just saying on the flute, that often do the trills from above. I was taking coaching from somebody in Atlanta who's very well known, and she said, no trills from above. Well, everybody that I listen to does trills from above, but the person is very, very well respected. But a lot of things is just up to your intuition, and if you try it and it just doesn't sound right to you, then you don't do it. You do something different. I mean, it's kind of a matter of taste, almost.
Absolutely.
You never want to take away from the melody. That's the big thing. So
yes,
the melody in you, and then you ornament from there, and the bass line. You don't want to disagree with the bass.
No, it's all about the bass. You guys are just extra.
It's all about that bass.
Yep. You're just extra. Yeah, when some years ago, earlier on in the Baroque period instrument revival, I remember going to a concert of French harpsichord music, and it has a lot of ornaments in it, and the particular player could play the ornaments very well. It was like these bullets doing, these little zizzes going on, and the melody was gone. It's really to make sure you don't lose the music structure under those ornaments. The ornaments have to enhance it. It's like jazz singing. It's the same thing. You don't, if they go so far away from the melody, I don't know about you, but I get irritated if they get too far off. Play with it, but if it gets just too far, you don't want to do that. So it's the same thing with us. It takes playing with it.
Now, for all those little different types of ornaments that you demonstrated, and so that's really left up to the performer in most cases?
Depends on the composer of the piece. Some of them were very specific about what they wanted and where, like some of the French composers. Couperin writes in his treatise before his book, "You will play it exactly as I write it here, don't mess with it." This is The Nightingale in Love, Rossignol en Amour. This version is a transcription of a harpsichord piece, and probably by Francois Couperin. It's a beautiful piece. It's imitating the sound of the nightingale as you're standing out at dusk by the edge of the woods.
Now, we had a French piece and then an Italian
Yes.
piece. and now we're to French again.
Yes.
Are there certain things that that listeners should be listening for in the French music that you wouldn't hear in the Italian, or vice versa?
There's a lot of ornaments in the French, and a lot more propensity to dance rhythms and things than you would have in some of the Italians, starting with the beautiful melodies that eventually evolves into big opera.
And you can't dance much in the convent, probably.
Probably not, true.
That's live performance.
Well, that's one of the joys of live performance, because you can get some variation. I noticed a lot of ornamentation in the flute, relatively little ornamentation in the harpsichord, except those cadenza trills that come at the end of the cadence, and which were much more complex. Now, it almost sounded like in part of the written part of the flute as well, it almost seemed like a written ornamentation, such, da-da-da, da-da-da,
Yeah,
da-da-da.
they are written out. So this is this edition has a lot of all the trills, and I'm not having to do it. There's also the double, which has even more trills.
Right, the duvet.
I think it's crazy. Just lots of things. And they even want, this is written for a modern flute too, so. It has a little turn at the end.
Nice.
It's impossible almost on this thing. So it could go even crazier.
But it's interesting too, because if you follow the melody almost is ornamentation in itself.
Right.
Because it sort of does a series of notes, and then it repeats those notes maybe just a couple tones higher.
It's a bird call. It is a bird call.
This starts the centuries and centuries of flutes being birds. Always.
Hey, you sound like a bird.
It's true.
Others didn't care. Bach expected you to do some improvisation, but he also at times would specifically write things in at length. So it will just look like lots of complicated writing, and you look at it and you realize what that is a very specific type of ornamentation, but he wants you to play it exactly that way.
The concerts on January 13th will be at noon and 7 p.m.
Yes.
And both will be in St. John's Episcopal Church.
Yeah, I think noon will be about an hour, and the evening will be an hour and a half.
So that someone could pretty much maybe even come on their lunch hour.
Yes.
If they wanted to come for lunch at the noon concert, and make it back maybe a couple minutes late,
But sated.
Musically sated.
emotionally enriched.
Able to deal with the rest of Friday.
Tonight we've been talking with members of Savannah Baroque at a rehearsal here in the sanctuary of St. Francis of the Islands Episcopal Church. I want to thank you so much for everything you've been saying tonight, because it's just been so intriguing and so wonderfully interesting. And I'm sure my listeners will be able to listen to Baroque music much better than they have in the past. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, this is wonderful.
Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun.
This has been another edition of Music Local and Sustainable, and I've been your host, Dave Lake. Save this time for another show next week.
Well, I know we ain't headed for the Hall of Fame. Gonna give it what we got, man, that ain't no shame. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2. Let me know if you can hear me. Check, check, 1, 2.